Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So it's our final evening together. And as I always make the same joke on these retreats, but if you had a pleasant time, a warm time, then you feel maybe a bit sad that it's the end. But if you had a terrible time, you're very happy to be going home. So it depends. But certainly beginnings are different than endings, feel different, right? And then endings condition new beginnings. You start to anticipate home life and work life. And so the cycles of our lives are like that. And I thought this evening I'd just like to perhaps reflect on skills, because we are, as human beings, we have this capacity to cultivate skills. And because we use the word practice a lot, don't we? That's a very common word. So if you see the table that the big Buddha's on, right? I enjoy woodwork, so I'm always looking at how things are made. So while you're chanting, I'm looking. So you can see that that tall table has 4 legs, a top, and it has pieces of wood joining the legs, holding the top. And those are called rails. And to make that table, you have to shape the legs, obviously. And then usually you make square holes in which the rails fit in. And the ends are cut to fit the square holes. And those holes are called mortices. And then the ends of the rails are called tenons. So that's called mortise and tenon. And it's called a mortise and tenon joint. And so in English, you have the word joinery. How do you join 2 pieces of wood together? You could use a screw, you can use glue, but in this case, you'd make 2 holes, 2 mortices for each leg. So that's 4 legs, total of 8 mortices. And you'd have to make 8 tenons. And you fit it all together. And then you put your top on top and you have a table. Okay? So I learned to do that, of course, and that's a kind of basic joinery, basic joint in woodworking. Makes a lot, but first of all, I had to figure it out. How do they do this? And that's pariyatti, that's study, right? But then actually doing it was a whole different. It's okay for me to look at a YouTube or look at a picture, but then when I actually try to straighten the wood out, figure out where the grain is, make the grain match, and then try to actually cut a square hole with a chisel or various ways, it's not so easy. It's obvious. You just make a square hole. Don't make it a problem. But it's actually not so easy. And then in the doing of it, I ruin one hole, or it's kind of a bit off. And then I said, well, yeah, the chisel has to be sharper, or I have to measure more accurately. And all the time I'm doing, I'm also learning, right? Doing is learning. Making is thinking, but thinking in a kind of pragmatic way. So that's also kind of a study in action. And that's a very important study, because I have to adapt to the Dharma of wood, right? Because the wood has its own characteristic, and I can have all the theories about wood I want. I have to give myself to the wood and give myself to the nature of metal and the nature of muscle and the nature of eye-hand coordination. And that's Dharma. Dharma is the truth of it. Theory is okay, very, very well. But when you start to strike the chisel into the wood, you split the wood or something like that, you say, oh, okay. So I'm not only building a piece of furniture, but I'm also developing the capacity to observe and learn, observe and learn, observe and learn, and understand the nature of wood, the nature of musculature, and all of that. And in the same way, when we, and so the practice that I do, right? I train in a certain practice that becomes a skill. And that's a skill. So I made a bench last year, which is quite large and quite heavy, and that required 40 mortise and tenon joints. It's quite a lot. And at times it was driving me crazy, but I persevered, and so I just got better and better at making mortise and tenon joints. And each time I learned something. And it's interesting I always find that interesting in craft, how I start something off. I don't know quite how I'm going to do this. And I look at YouTube quite often. That's very helpful. And then I'll read a book, and then I'll try, and then I'll feel clumsy, and then I'll make a mess, and then I'll try again. And all of a sudden I'm doing it. Learning is quite magic in that tactile way. And it's not the learning of just facts. You could cite all the facts about wood grain and so on you wanted, but you wouldn't build the furniture. So it's not fact-based knowledge, it's practice-based knowledge. And to me, that aspect of skill is kind of very interesting, how we learn. Say if you just like cooking an egg, you take it for granted, but an egg is not an orange. So already when you see an egg, you know, if you don't refrigerate, it's going to be rotten. And so you have to adapt to the Dharma of egg, right? And when you take it out of the fridge, you don't take it out like you take an orange. You certainly don't throw it on the floor. An orange, you could just bounce. An egg, splat. So you have to take care of it in a certain way. And then if you break the egg on the edge of the frying pan, you have to hit it just right. If you hit it too hard, if you don't, and I mean, we take all that for granted, but at some point we learned how to fry an egg. And again, you have to adapt to the nature of the egg, not just your idea of an omelet. And so you know, someone tells you how to do it, but then the doing, you're always learning. And that's very much how we develop skill in meditation. We also have the word inspiration or illumination, and that quite often is I think I suffered from that to some extent early on, when I thought, well, if I just try really hard to do anapanasati or whatever, I'll reach a point and my mind will explode and I'll be enlightened. Good luck. So it's a kind of, I'm going to get something, but there was some learning, but there was this kind of idea of just the great shebang in my head or something like that. Whereas developing a skill is different, isn't it? And so what skills are we what are the skills that we have learned here maybe, or we're developing? Well, obviously the skills of living a good life as a human being in our families, in our workplaces, is something we have to learn. It's like just right communication, right speech. It's a constant learning, isn't it? Right? You're trying to, you know, not like just writing good emails or learning not to write emails. That's a skill too. Don't do it, Viradhammo. Don't say anything. Wait. So that's a skill that is part of samavaja, right speech. And how do you learn the skill of right speech? Well, you make intentions. And then as you speak and communicate with people, you see how, ooh, that didn't work, right? You think you should really criticize this person, and you do, and it just gets worse. Then you think you shouldn't say anything, and you're afraid, and that doesn't work. So there was a question from one of the Zoom folk. What was it? It was something like, if I have a friend and I don't want to tell them the whole truth, and I only tell them a half truth because I'm sensitive to the issues they have, is that sort of not keeping the the precept. Well, what's the real issue there? The real issue is your intention. Where's your heart at, right? Just to say you have to say the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Well, that's the ideal, I suppose. But what you can really, really know is where you're coming from. So if the reason I don't speak truth to this person is because I'm afraid, there'll be consequences. Or the reason I speak truth to this person is because I want to diminish them in some way, or I want to hurt them, or whatever. I think that's more the issue of importance in terms of how you speak, because people are going to misunderstand you no matter what. But if you, misunderstanding is just human communication, isn't it? You do your best, but if you really understand your intentions, where you're coming from, then even if people misunderstand you, well, I didn't intend that. I wasn't meaning to hurt anyone, and I can maybe get better at. So one of the skills we're developing is the skill of awakening to intention. What is behind my doings in the world? Why do I do what I do and say what I say and act the way I act? And monitoring that is coming from the basic skill of awakening to the way things are. So on a retreat, you don't really have to work too much on right speech. I guess a little bit, but whatever. If we can get that basic training of awakening to the way things are, and that's really my hope for a retreat. Just get that down. Just awaken to what's going on. Then that's a huge step. That's a huge step in human development. Because from that, I can see that, like, the reason I communicate with you the way I do is because I'm afraid of you. And then I can see the result of that. The result of fear is more fear or whatever. So intention or cetana is how karma is created, isn't it? We say intentions create situations. If I'm not aware of intention, then I'm not going to really be aware of the roots of my actions. So in say, like I used to be on the rowing team at University of Toronto for a few years. Rowing, rowing, eight men in a boat, all going backwards. It's the craziest sport. And on their bums, back and forth, back and forth. So I did that for a few years, and that was really interesting training, because I was a young guy, and my body's needs to. I like sport, and so we would go on in Toronto on Lake Ontario, in the autumn. Usually, it's an autumn training. We'd be on the water almost when it was still dark, and then we trained for an hour and a half, and that was really interesting and quite lovely, because we were 8 men and a guy that steers it called a coxswain, and a coach in a boat, and just like every day doing something like that, as a group. And that's what we've been doing as a group. Creates an interesting sense of community and communion. Now, if we were just talking to each other about our issues, the problems we have, then we'd probably not like each other. So, but just like sitting together and suffering through the same knee pains, or the same, or whatever, and just doing this together, training this way together, creates the sense of Sangha. And that's the kind of beauty we've had here together of like Kalyanamitta, spiritual friends. And that's I think a very important part of developing a Buddhist lifestyle is good friendships. I guess everyone, all of us, as we get older, isn't that one of the most valuable things? And you're good friends, and like, I have such good friends, such as Sorrow and Mampapassano and these great beings, and we're all just mates. We're not special. I know lay people think we're special, but we don't think we're special. We're just guys, right? We sort of were, we had long hair. We ended up at Wat Pong. And so here we are. And we were quite ordinary. But just that feeling of, like Ajahn Sucitto or these men who have really worked hard on the path and been dedicated to the path and practiced and really practiced and understood themselves. And we're all different. We all have different conditioning and different characters. And so each of us had to honor the Dharma of our own minds. And that's sometimes hard because you kind of see another monk doing something and you think I should be like them. And that sense of comparison is really not really all that useful because it's not your mind. So like just as you have to understand the egg and the nature of egg, you have to understand the nature of your own conditioning. So say a man's conditioning is different than a woman's conditioning. The physicality of a woman is different than the physicality of a man. The cultural conditioning of a Thai is different than the cultural conditioning of a Canadian. The cultural conditioning of a Canadian refugee is different than the et cetera, right? And just understanding actually who you are, rather than who you want to be or who you think you should be or you shouldn't be, because that's not the Dharma of egg. You are this egg, you're not maybe you're a duck egg or some kind of egg. And that's what I think what Satya is about. Satya Parami is just being kind of truthful to how it is for you now, right? As opposed to this sense of idealism that we might have. So if I have a lot of dosa that I have to deal with, or I'm quite lazy, that's okay. That's the Dharma that you're working from, and then from that sense of awakening to the conditioning of your own being, then you can really apply the Four Noble Truths. If you just try to apply them in some idealistic way, it won't work. And the Four Noble Truths are really practical. They're incredibly practical teaching. They're not theoretical. You have to take the pragmatism into you have to make it practical, for sure. You have to understand that. And so then the fundamental aspect of awakening then is, of course, discontent. To actually make conscious the fact that there is discontent. Now that's easy to say, but quite often we'll be just caught in our discontents and complaining or worrying or whatever, and not notice, oh, discontent is like this. And that's really it's really like understanding wood as wood and egg as egg. And that's the first noble truth, is that there is suffering, is not a philosophical statement that life is rotten. And this is how other traditions take it. They say the Buddhists think that life is suffering, but they don't realize that actually there's an end to suffering. So I've seen, I think one of the popes wrote or his scholars wrote a book about all the other religions, and we got lumped up. How did we get? What did they say about us? They said we were nihilistic because we had no transcendent truth, no God, and also all we talked about was suffering. Life is suffering, but that's not understanding Buddhism at all. And so the first noble truth is there is suffering as an awakening rather than a conclusion. It's not like pessimism. Oh, life is suffering. I don't want to get born again. That's not it. No. It's like discontent feels like this. There is this feeling of discontent. That's terribly important to understand. But that leads onwards. We say the Dhamma leads onwards. It doesn't, it's not like life is suffering and then you shoot yourself. It's like it leads onwards to the awakening to the cause. Right? But if you never make conscious that wood is this way and egg is that way and suffering is this way, if you never make conscious that just the very existential problem of suffering, then you can never really get out of it. You can't possibly get out. You can distract it, you can blame it, but you can't get out of it. And so that if you think about skill and training, you train in the practice of awakening to discontent. And that's kind of doable, but it does take training until you're so skillful that any movement towards discontent, you know it better and better. You know it in your body, you know it as bodily tension, you know it as thought, in all the ways it manifests. And for each of us, it manifests differently. So like the example I gave this morning about the email, we all have that, don't you? You know, oh God, there's Derek again. There's that email again. And that's discontent. That's what discontent feels like. So if you're training in the practice of awakening to discontent, as soon as you see that name come up, I hope there's no one called Derek listening to these talks, or I'll be in trouble. Derek, I'm sorry. But the name comes up. And then if you're really practicing and training and awakening, you say, oh, discontent feels this way, because the name stimulates something negative in you. But if you're not aware, and then you get caught up in blaming and so on and so forth, then at some point you have to, oh yeah, wait. This is what suffering feels like. And that you can see, you have to do that all the time, because discontent is constantly, you know, we're like really sensitive emotionally, physically. It doesn't take much to bruise us, right? Someone can just, you know, kind of call me. They used to call me skinhead. I wonder why. Or, what was another one? Some guys, you know, guys would like, they'd drive by in New Zealand and yell, why'd you get a job? The worst was someone spit on me in Toronto. They drove by and they spit on me. It was really quite, there was a lot of hatred when I went back to Toronto in 77, the Hare Krishna had a lot of scandals in North America, to the extent that there was a murder in their community. So Hare Krishna had a really, really bad reputation. And of course, the press loves that. Sects and cults and all that kind of thing. And my dad actually had been on downtown Toronto, and a woman came to him with a bunch of daffodils. And she said, she shoved one in his hand and said, you have to buy it. You took it from me. So he opens his wallet and she grabs $10 from him like that, you know. So there was a lot of heavy stuff around them. So when I went to Toronto, you know, from Thailand, it's the first time I'd been back in Toronto for 7 years, they thought I was Hare Krishna. And then, you know, you get a lot of abusive language, and I'm not, I'm a Buddhist. But then, yeah, so the worst was that kind of felt really, really awful. But so, and then later it changed, and then the Dalai Lama came to Toronto, and then it was, then he cured everyone. We're okay now. We're actually cool. It just took a while. But anyway, so there's the discontent of being, you know, someone yelling at you, but if you're really on your game and the practice of awakening, oh, you know, abusive language feels this way, and it, you know, it affects me. But I can, if I'm aware of it, then what's the affect, and what's the real cause of suffering, and then I can question, right? And I'm training in that questioning mind. And just as I am learning in woodwork, in the doing of the woodwork, I'm learning in the doing of life. And life is your woodwork, isn't it? It's your furniture kind of thing. And so if one's doing that all the time, then the Four Noble Truths become the background of your contemplative life, the background of your lived life. And it's a background of understanding yourself. It's beautiful. It's a really, really practical teaching. So then, you know, the guy yells at me, and I was with another monk. So we were going Pindapat in Toronto, which was futile. Never got anything but abuse. But we just thought we're forced monks, you know, get out there. And my mother, you know, oh God, these guys, they come from Mars. They're going on my streets begging. The poor thing. I think we gave it up because we had compassion for her. But anyway, we'd go out And then the result was we kind of get a little paranoid. And then we were approaching some guys who were collecting garbage. And we thought, okay, here it comes. And they said, good morning. And they were really kind. So, oh, thank you. But it's just, that's the story. But this, the sense of always learning from life's challenges through the simple model of Four Noble Truths. So then that's like the learning in place, in situation. That's why repetition of the same teaching, I mean, hear it again and again and again and again, but it's not really boring, because it is about your existence, and you want to make it alive. So studying it and reading about it, but not just having an opinion about it, right? So that, let's say, like in like training and the practice and developing skill, then you start to see that the causes of your suffering are actually sort of fundamental distortions of your perceptions of life. So the fundamental distortion of mine was a fearful perspective and a fearful interpretation and a constantly fearful perceptions of people and how they saw me. So I saw that, okay, there's some, in my learning process, it's not just about me being nervous about giving a Dharma talk. No, it's about some perception I have of myself and others, which is not accurate, which is not true. And then I keep learning and seeing that, and I'm seeing it arise. And you can see that's a skill. That's a very particular skill to my particular problem. And I get better and better at it. And then I understand through that observation and consideration, I see, so what's the real problem here? And I read a teaching, it's attachment to desire. Well, what do you mean by desire? You want to get rid of this? Oh, I see, yeah. You want to get rid of this? Oh, okay. And Luangpor Viradhammo says, you want to get rid of this? Well, of course I want to get rid of this. I mean, yeah, I don't want fear. That's the problem. That's where you have to look. That's where you have to look. Okay, I'm looking in the wrong place. And that's just the same as like, I'm not hitting this chisel right, or that egg's all over the floor now. It's just the same kind of problem solving, except at quite a deeply conditioned level. And so in this, my own example, then I finally, through inquiry and watching, what's the cause? It's attachment to desire. I finally understood that. I finally understood desire and attachment to desire vis-a-vis fear. And I understood the kind of the Dharma of my own mind. I understood how my mind worked. But then that wasn't the end, because there was still so I understood how to hit the chisel, but now I had to hit the chisel, and I had to work and make the furniture, as it were. And so the furniture making is really, okay, how can I make a beautiful mind? How can I let go of this tendency? And then I forget, and I get lost in it, and I do metta bhavana, and I develop skill. So I develop the ideas about metta bhavana and begin to see it cease and all the rest of it. And that's an interaction with life. It's a constant interaction, a constant learning, but it's not thinking about yourself. That's what all the people don't understand about Buddhist contemplation. You're not just thinking about yourself all the time. That's narcissism. Am I good? Am I not good? I'm great. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. That's just thinking about yourself. That's not thinking about Dharma, right? So narcissism or self-obsession is neurotic. This isn't neurotic. This is looking at neurosis. You're observing suffering, which is a form of neurosis, I would say, and its cause. So you're looking at Dharma, the Dharma of this mind and its conditioning, rather than being self-obsessed. And that's why we talk about anatta. We talk about the phenomena of suffering. We say suffering. There is suffering, not I am suffering. Right? And that's actually could have. When Luangpor Viradhammo kept repeating that, I said, oh yeah, I get it. There is suffering, is the awakening to the phenomena of suffering, rather than, oh gosh, I'm suffering again. That's self-view. So we're not dismissing the phenomena of suffering, but we are actually looking at it as Dharma, the Dharma of suffering. And then that gives you entry into the other noble truths. So I had to extricate myself from the drama of my suffering and the storylines of my suffering to just the kind of bare experience of fear and the causes of fear. And so sometimes, of course, suffering doesn't seem to be very prevalent. Sometimes life is very, very ordinary, but we can become heedless. The thing about hard, strong suffering, at least it awakens you, but like moderate suffering, sort of suffering, tamadas suffering, you can fall asleep with it. Like you can be kind of just doubting, and it's not really great suffering, but you can just be doubting, and just kind of be lost in a kind of nebulous sense of self, because there's no real oomph. Like at least if you're paranoid, you can notice it. And I think that's the way our practice evolves. It evolves to more subtle things. And these are called the moha characteristics. Moha is delusion. And, like little worries or little self-doubts or little questions. And a lot of that is just wrong thinking, just kind of lost in endless thinking. And so I've been suggesting this, the way of body awareness. And I found that tremendously helpful and interesting too, to start to correlate my mental suffering with physical stress or my mental relaxation with physical relaxation, to see that they are totally related. They're not distant. And so again, I was talking to the good doctor about that. That when I started to try to be aware of the body, you've heard me say this, but my heart chakra was like not there, just dead. I was only alive from here up, kind of thing. And so I rubbed tiger balm here to try to get some life in there, to try to get the heart alive. But I intuitively I knew, no, you have to be, you can't just be in thought all the time. Like Luangpor Cha would say, with the Western monks, we usually have band-aids all over our toes. And we say, you Farang have stupid feet. Because we'd always be stubbing our toes on the roots. Kit mak. Farang kit mak. Yeah, Luangpor always say, you Farangs are just the same as us Thais, except you've got longer noses and you think more. Anyway, I don't know if the thinking's true, but I could see that what would be really helpful for me is to have other areas of attention than just always thought. And so, like, to train in body awareness. And I enjoyed sports, so I had some sense of being embodied. It wasn't totally disassociated from my body, but just the kind of like understanding the energy body and understanding the facial muscles, but not as an anatomical exercise, but as an exercise in understanding contraction, energy, and then understanding fear and anger. Again, not as a concept, but as a felt and embodied kind of experience. Just as if you do like if you train in tennis and you really work a lot to get your game, then your knowledge is in your body, right? It's in your body, how you hold the racket. And I've never really played tennis. I used to play squash, but not tennis. But there's something very embodied in that, and understanding ourselves, because we are incarnate, like the physical realm is embodied, to understand ourselves as a physical being. Like I was just saying to someone, to kind of look at a picture of, let's say if you have a grandchild, and look at a happy picture of your grandchild and then feel your heart. It's a beautiful way to understand yourself, isn't it? Oh, and then to be annoyed at your partner and feel your heart. That's a different way to understand your relationship, but it is a way of understanding. And so the education in our spiritual life is not just abstract knowledge. It's embodied knowledge. It's insightful knowledge, intuitive knowledge. Don't we all find that with years of practice, we just intuitively know when there's wrong effort or right effort. We just know because we've gone all down different kinds of pathways. So a retreat then hopefully has given you kind of skills or themes of practice and some skill that you kind of carry on in ordinary life, rather than it just being some really neat experience that then you face the world with fear. Oh no, I have to go back to the world. No. So Luangpor Viradhammo always said, which is just give everything up, all your insights, all your samadhi, all the peace. Just give it all up and just take it as it comes. Because the danger of like this is, it's not going to get any easier than this, by the way. This is like good people, perfect weather, fabulous cappuccino, etc., etc., etc. Right? So as Luangpor might say, he would say to me when we were together and it was really neat. He'd say, "Viradhammo, this is a peak experience. You can't keep it so good, right? So if it changes and there's confusion or there's misunderstanding, then you say, oh, it's supposed to be that way. That's life is that way. And then it will be a problem. But if you hold on to the sense of kalyanamitta and tranquility that we have here and hope that it doesn't change, you're in trouble. It's going to be bad news. So if it changes, and it will, it has to change, hopefully for the better. But what doesn't change? So if you're threatened by change, like, oh no, it's going to change, and then you have no refuge. But if you observe, okay, now life is more coarse, and I'm feeling irritated. Oh yeah, irritation feels like that. Then it's actually not a problem because you're not attached to tranquility or the goodness of this. And then of course we have more gratitude. So I don't know about you, I just find that when life is really harmonious and beautiful, like it's been this week, I'm just really grateful. I said, wow, aren't we really lucky, right? And then when it changes, it's supposed to change. And then what ton or Maine, whatever language you want to use, but it's not a problem. So the awakened mind is a refuge. It really is. And you think about it, all the different experiences that we've had, and the experiences which we will have. We don't know where we're going. We don't know. You don't know what's going to happen to the planet, right? Maybe we'll be walking around with gas masks next year, helmets. I don't know. Maybe I get more and more weird. But in some sense, okay, we'll take that, but we do have refuge. I don't want that, but we do have refuge. And that's the simple awakening to the way things are. So that's really the base practice of Buddhism, Penyang Ni Eng. It's very, very simple. Okay, we'll close there then.